Hi, my name is Naishali. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, my name
Laurel.
is, oh, sorry. Hi, my name
You
is
go
Nub,
ahead.
and I use she, her pronouns.
Laurel, she, her pronouns.
Brady, he, him pronouns.
And this week we're going to be talking about two films. We're going to be talking about the experimental film from 1943 called Meshes of the Afternoon and the 1960 film Breathless, which follows the story of this criminal named Michel. I can't pronounce his last name. I don't speak French, but he basically kills a police officer, and then you follow him and his girlfriend trying to escape to Rome. And at the end of the film, spoiler alert, his girlfriend, Patricia, turns him in and he ends up getting killed by a police officer. So we're going to be talking about how editing plays a part in both of these films. And I think a good place to start would be with Meshes of the Afternoon. So if anyone has any starting point, that'd be great.
I really liked the way that Meshes the Afternoon, it used its editing, and the editing really allows the viewers to take in the fact that it's not something that's reality, it's a dream sequence. And as you come to the conclusion of this short film, you can tell that it was a dream sequence in a sense because she's dead. And it really shows through like the different props and how they're cut together. It doesn't really line up, so it doesn't follow like the temporal line, and that if you break down the people that are there, it's like a reflection of herself and her like domestic life and how she feels trapped in it. I don't know if anybody else picked it up like that, but that's like in conjunction with the reading after I had seen it, I thought that was really creative.
Yeah, definitely. For this film, it really reminded me of the Salvador Dali film Un Chien Andalou, which is coincidentally a French film like Breathless is. But Un Chien Andalou is this like surrealist manifesto, if you will. It really jump-started the surrealist movement in film, and it kind of broke the barriers and broke the molds of like what film could be. And it didn't need to have, beginning, middle, end, like plot and all of this. It could be a conglomeration of different dream sequences and this kind of psychoanalytic Freudian type thing where you're just pulling images from the deepest, most depths of your mind and trying to give them meaning, right? And I think that's really what we're getting here. And it kind of, while I was watching it, I really just noticed that it had a lot of surrealist inspiration in the way that, like Laurel said, it is a dream sequence. The woman does fall asleep, and then you kind of see these images and these actions happening that seemingly have no meaning. That I kind of want to talk about first, the props in the part that they played, and especially with editing. So I was wondering if anyone had some thoughts about like specifically like the key, the rose, or the knife.
Yeah, so there's a clip like about 10 minutes in. Let me see if I can pull it up because I think we could watch it. But basically it's like the hand with the key, and then it's like boom, it's a knife. It's like a knife just replaces the key with, like, that was a form of editing. And I'm just gonna pull up the clip right now. We don't have access to these films, do we? Oh, we do.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought this up because that was one thing that I really heavily noted, was the way in which props would disappear or props would change what they were, and it was just like a jump cut, and suddenly a totally different thing would be on the screen, which I think is just inherently really symbolic, and we can talk a lot about.
Yeah.
Also the use of shadows and silhouette figures. If we could get into that after, that would be great.
Yeah.
Let me know if you guys can see this.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think it's around here. So that was the one use of it. It wasn't the exact clip that I was talking about. I'm gonna keep playing this and see. Do you guys remember? Do you think it's after this part, the part with the
Are you
hand?
talking about the part where she would pick up the key and then the key would disappear from her hand?
Yeah, like it would be a shot of her hand with the key sitting in the middle, and then just like it just did that cut from the key to the knife, it did that, but it was in her hand. So I'm just gonna play this for a few more seconds and see if it comes up. Yeah, I think it's. So yeah, that's what I was talking about. And so yeah, they did it a few times. I also just noticed watching that clip again that it looks like there's like clones of her. Like there's like multiple versions of her sitting around this table. So there's a lot to talk about, yeah.
It definitely displays the like her inner turmoil within herself that she feels, that I forget if it was she killed herself or if the window was like blown in, but like her key out of her mundane life would be to kill herself. And just the key turning into the knife and so on, back and forth. I think that's like a really creative way of displaying like inner thoughts.
Do you think so? That's a really good point. So I mean, like if that's what it is, then it's, what do you guys think that these other versions of her represent, like that are sitting around the table? And the way that we can play the scene again, but maybe the way that the editing foils these versions of her. I'll play the clip again and we could talk about that.
Maybe turn the volume off on it because it's the receiving. It's like
For
really
sure.
high pitched.
Okay, hold on. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna go back like a minute. Is it okay if it's low?
Yeah, it was just. The fact that there's three of her definitely brings up the idea of like see no evil, speak no evil, do no evil.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like one way of interpreting it.
Yeah,
I
mentioned, I think I mentioned earlier, but as we're watching this, Un Chien Andalou and this film really do, I feel, have like these Freudian aspects of it where you're kind of going into the deepermost parts of your mind. And I think that she's in this domestic setting where women kind of tend to feel trapped, and she's kind of letting these different parts of herself free, even if it is through like her dreams and her dream sequence. But you have like and then I don't know if it's this, yeah, you have the knife, which the first time I think we see the knife, it's cutting a loaf of bread. And isn't that it's a very domestic use for a knife, right? It's like a kitchen use, but then you have it here being used as like an antagonistic, like, you know, violent thing. Like she's obviously out for blood in this scene. So I think we do get that kind of like with the use of like the key turning into the knife and just the domestic setting of it, you kind of add these layers upon layers upon layers of these like symbolic props.
Yeah, that's all interesting. And also was thinking about the hand and how like the hand turns like black, and then after the knife comes out, then all the versions of her themselves have their hand like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of shots.
I know there's so much like interesting to talk about. I'm trying to like keep it focused on the editing a little bit. So I'm just gonna play this one more time for my own reference.
There's a lot of shots and blocking of like her neck being heavily exposed or her interacting with that part of her body, which also like parallels the fact that her throat was slit.
Yeah. Also, the way that she's sitting across from those two versions of herself, it kind of seemed like maybe like, you know, like this version of herself seems to like be like, oh, here, take the key, you know, like angel and devil, or not angel and devil, but they're sitting across from her as like kind of her judgment, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that like, you know, as we're talking about like all these versions of herself sitting around the table at one time, for being from, you know, 1943, this film is using kind of really nice, really adept use of editing here in the way that it's like there obviously there isn't three of her, like she's not a triplet or whatever, but they're kind of cutting together these different shots that they have in order to make something, you know, kind of cohesive in order to display this kind of I guess duality within herself that they're trying to express through these multiple versions sitting at the kitchen table.
I wanted to point out, as it was as we were talking about with the three people, I think it's interesting how they swing the camera from one person to the next, and it seamlessly. There's only one person, but it swings from one of the women to the other, and it appears as though they're in the same shot. And I think that's an interesting use of the editing.
Yeah, the way that, you know, those two shots are cut together and it kind of creates this surrealist continuity in the way that like you're given the illusion that, you know, with the shot traveling from one person to another, that it is actually someone sitting across from themselves, but in reality it's really just putting together two shots of the same exact person in order to create this like seemingly cohesive moment.
And that's an editing technique that was used a lot. Like it's even used up until this day to give the appearance of two different actors in the same room when it's the same person. Definitely something like out of this creative, like experimental film genre that made it into mainstream film and is seen, like I said, still to this day.
Oh yeah, right. So, anything else about any other scenes from this film that you guys want to talk about? The beginning was part with all the stairs. I don't know exactly what it is. Was interesting, but do you guys have any scenes that you want to look at from this, or do you guys want to move on to Breathless?
I think
The
we
opening
can.
scene,
Opening scene?
just
All
real
right, let's
quick,
look
the
at the
opening
opening scene
scene,
and then we can move on to Breathless.
the opening scene is editing. It's really captivating in a sense, and their uses of using the silhouettes of the shadows as its own character instead of putting an actor there, I thought was a very interesting way of like there's only like probably like two or three actors in this film, and they make it appear that there's more than that. Also, very much like Breathless, the cuts are very jumpy. There's no connecting between some actions. I don't know if anybody else noticed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There definitely are similarities. This opening scene the camera focus and the editing is like not giving you, like, if we were to compare it to the beginning of Safe had all these really wide shots. You got to see, you know, the whole house, the whole outfit, the whole scene, every part of the room. This beginning intro, we're getting like close-ups of her feet and the sidewalk and the flower and the key, and so it doesn't, and it's jumpy too, so it doesn't give us that ambiance of like, oh, I know where we are, I know the setting. So that's something I noticed watching this opening scene. Any other things?
I do have more thoughts about this film itself, but I don't think that the screen sharing is necessarily
Yeah,
like I don't need it for like what I'm about to say.
sure.
But we did just watch the scene where the key is on the table and then the key disappears and it's in her hand and it disappears, right? And I think that in doing that, you kind of like, in just having things appear and then disappear, you kind of have this kind of detachment from reality, right? That this is really trying to, that this film and this genre itself is just really trying to create with the editing, because you obviously can't get that appearing disappearing effect without cutting together scenes in which the key's there and then the key's not there. And I think that in doing that, they really tried to create this kind of like symbolic, I keep saying psychoanalytical, but this kind of like psychoanalytical moment within the film where this woman, obviously she's trapped within this domestic space, but then you have all these versions of herself reaching towards a key, which I think in the reading kind of reference that like keys are usually used in cinema as a symbol for answers and a symbol for understanding. And then you have her reaching towards it and you have the illusion that she has it, and then obviously she's not able to fully grasp understanding and answers that this key represents. And I think that the editing with that, not only detaching us, I guess, from reality and kind of like traditional continuity and like how things are supposed to go within reality, and then you have that underlying symbolism. I think that editing really aided in building these layers of symbolism and these layers of, you know, just kind of editing and cinematography within the film.
I think trapped is a really good word. I noticed that the way they position the camera in a lot of the scenes does make it seem very closed off. Like the way that they filmed that hall, and they only use like two or three rooms, makes it hard to grasp how big the house is or how big the area is. And I just think that gives it a sense of like panic.
Yeah, and when you have these jump cuts of her going down the stairs and like her figure's kind of like jumping up and down the stairs, right? And then again you have like that loss of continuity, you have that kind of loss of like realistic, like realism. You have this completely and utterly surreal moment being created here, but then again, in doing that, I think we kind of get the maybe confusion or the disorientation that this woman is feeling while being trapped within this space. And I think, like earlier I mentioned props, and the props I find with their appearing and disappearing and changing into other props, the way in which that they reoccur throughout the entire film, I think it just every time they reoccur in a different context, it adds a layer of meaning to it. I don't know if that really made sense, but I was wondering if anyone else noticed like the way in which like it's edited and to have things just kind of like appear and then disappear. Like I keep repeating it, but I was wondering if anyone else kind of noticed that, or like in another instance with props in the way that like I think when Anouk tried to point out the key turning into the knife or the key disappearing, if anyone else had another
I
observation.
mean, the usage of like three basic props and how like, well, not as much as the others, but with the glass, how that was used in like three different ways. There was the like glass person, the glass figure that was a reflective mirror instead of having a face. When the woman wakes up and throws something at her husband and the screen shatters and the glass falls through to show another scene. And I believe there was a mirror as well, like just a basic handheld mirror. just the usage of how they can so many having not having as many props, but they can hold so much meaning within them, and we could like break that down for like a very long time.
Yeah. There was one scene where when she's laying in the bed, and then the man comes in and he has they have a flower, right? And this flower represents, well, usually it's used in a symbolic way to represent beauty and to represent love. And then the flower turns into a knife. So now suddenly you have this kind of very domestic, I would assume, marital moment between this guy and, you know, the woman, and he's kind of running his hands up and down her body. And then you have this prop that's very beautiful, and then it suddenly turns into something antagonistic, and she has a knife. And then his face, you know, with the use of editing, it kind of fractures into a broken mirror. So again, with the way that this domestic space, this house and then the kitchen are turned from something domestic to something ominous and kind of threatening, you have that again with that use of editing, from the flower turning into the knife, and then kind of this, who I assume is supposed to be her husband, he literally fractures, and then this broken glass is the cause of her death. So with editing, they're able to kind of transcend reality in order to create new meanings. So like, you obviously can't do that with practical filmmaking. You need kind of this intervention of editing and to create these symbolic moments within the film, which I really did appreciate. This isn't my favorite genre, this kind of experimental black and white thing, but stuff like that I think is really interesting to dissect.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how like these editing techniques, like I said before, have carried on like till today. And with this short film, it's very much apparent that this isn't the reality of what's going on. But in today's films, movies that also do this kind of like out of reality shots of stuff can be viewed as like something that's diegetic to its own world, especially with like sci-fi and whatnot. I just think it's really interesting how like creative films like this and experimental films have been able to cause such like tidal waves of influence onto things that we see today and so on.
Yeah, I like this, you know, with the jump shots between props. It's not realistic in the sense of it's not conveying consistency between objects and even between time with, you know, the fragmented shots, and that's on purpose, you know, but that's very different from kind of the direction that Hollywood took with its films. And so that places this kind of film, this kind of editing as, you know, more alternative or avant-garde. And so, yeah, and I think this would be a great way to segue into Breathless, because, you know, Breathless was more realistic in its shots, and it didn't have as much, you know, it didn't have the same editing, obviously. So, but one thing I can say to start would be, I don't know if any of you guys noticed this, please let me know if you did. There was 2 times that I noticed this happening. So the first time I saw this happen was in the scene where, do you guys know the guy's name?
Michelle. I hate to cut you off right now, but I just have one last thought about Meshes of the Afternoon.
Okay,
I'm so sorry, I hate to cut you off, but I was like, when am I going to fit this in? I think Laurel mentioned how Meshes kind of influenced, or like the style in which it's filmed kind of you see influences in contemporary cinema. And with the time in which this film was released, which is 1943, and then you have these kind of German expressionist influences within this film, right? You see kind of like the past trickling down through cinema, and you have these kind of like harsh, high contrast lighting. Like, it is black and white, but it's like Breathless, you don't have as much contrast within it as you do in Meshes of the Afternoon, which I think I'm kind of veering into cinematography right now with lighting, but you have this kind of thing where this dichotomy is being represented, right? This kind of light versus dark. And then, like I said before, you kind of have props and settings and kind of actions are switching their connotations within this, and editing does contribute to that. But you do have this kind of German expressionist influence very heavily seen that was in the post-war era of cinema with like the noir movement, and then you had these kind of like from Europe, you had these all of these influences being taken. And now we could go into Breathless, because I think Breathless kind of frames itself as like a neo-noir, and it has these post-war influences of kind of this nihilistic and violent and crude atmosphere that you really didn't get before World War II. Like World War II really did flip a switch within cinema, and I think that within Breathless you do see that, and that kind of I think connects meshes in Breathless, because you have these kind of, I don't want to say surrealist, because Breathless in its like self isn't a surrealist film, but you have this kind of breaking the mold and kind of paving new ways with like European influence and German expressionism, and I can keep repeating these words, but that's just something that I want to say that I thought was really interesting about this film, that I thought that like the way in which the high contrast is used kind of, I guess, ties back to what we were talking about with the way that things have new meaning, and editing gives things new meaning, and then this high contrast gives a deeper level of symbolism. So I'm so sorry I cut you off earlier to go on that pretentious rant.
I was just gonna say, that's a great transition. And actually, Breathless, thinking about it, could have adopted some of these editing techniques from the avant-garde expressionist films. So what I was going to say, which connects to what you were just saying, actually was, so let me know if you guys remember this, but so it first happened in the first scene where Mikkel was taking out his gun in the car. We first see his gun in the car. And then it happened again towards the end of the film, I think, when he was running from not running, but he was when he was on the run. But like, the camera didn't do much jump shots during the film, but I noticed these two times that the camera would you would see like a stunt in the camera. Like there would be the tiniest cut, like a millisecond cut. And it only happened these two times. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but that was something that stuck out to me a lot.
Definitely noticed towards, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Brady, what were you going to say?
I definitely noticed towards the end of the movie, there was a cut where he basically like jumped across the street, and it seemed like it was a mistake even. And I think that's what you're talking about.
No, so that's a good point, but I'm basically talking about like it was like a glitch almost, like it was like a frame got taken out, like it was just the tiniest little cut, like barely noticeable. It didn't change what he was doing. It was just like a little glitch kind of thing. But it was on purpose. So you guys didn't notice that?
I did. I'm just trying to form my thoughts here. I think that throughout the entire film, jump cuts were so heavily used. I think in every scene, I think we have an instance of jump cuts. And usually when you have a jump cut, right, you have it from what's happening in the moment and then kind of something unrelated. I feel like that's kind of the use that we're familiar with the jump cut, is it's kind of supposed to be disorienting, and it's kind of like supposed to just transition you really quickly into the next thing. But in Breathless, they used it in a way that like Anouk said, you have like these milliseconds taken off, and he's still doing the same thing. And I think that the point of that, like the reason why the filmmaker decided to, I forget his name right now, is because the way in which Michelle sees the world and the way in which this kind of plot unfolds, it's kind of, I guess, disjointed, and like Michelle kind of lives in his fantasy world, right? And I think that the editing is kind of conveying that, because you have these cuts that are very intentional, and you're taking out moments of the film while still maintaining continuity, right? You have like these scenes, I don't know if I'm necessarily making sense, but like they're maintaining continuity while still taking out and jumping around as much as they can. And it kind of gives the audience this kind of disorienting feeling that, like, I don't know if anyone else has a different interpretation of what these jump cuts mean, but I think that, like, the way in which they're able to have a cohesive scene with all of these parts taken out of it is, like, a really, lack for a better word, interesting technique.
Not like a different opinion about it, but I thought it was really interesting how the dialogue flowed without being like cutty or jumpy, but like especially the scene in one of the opening scenes where he visits the girl in her house. Their dialogue and conversation completely flows normal, but he'll be like standing and sitting in two different shots, even though it's supposed to be like consecutive to what's happening. Which like connects to what you were talking about with like that kind of jumpiness. It's just the fact that the dialogue isn't jumpy, even though the shots are.
Yeah, like I don't know if I like phrased it kind of the way I wanted to, but like I think with Breathless, and I guess with Meshes also, but more so with Breathless, I think in the films that kind of we're used to, or even the ones that we watched before, like Piano and Safe, editing serves as a tool to kind of help along the narrative, right? It's kind of not really supposed to be noticeable in a really big way. It's just kind of a thing from to get to one place to the other place, right? But and Breathless, it doesn't necessarily stand subordinate to the narrative. It stands alongside it as its own thing. Like, I feel like the editing in this film is kind of like it's not a tool for the narrative. It's completely stands as its like as its own thing. I think I'm just repeating myself, but like the way in which, like, I think it just adds like deeper levels of meaning. I keep repeating myself, but one scene that I really do notice this is the scene where he kills the police officer, and the editing in that scene seems disjointed and it seems all over the place, but I think it really does give this kind of chance for interpretation. So I was wondering if anyone remembers that scene where he kills the cops and you have like these jump cuts in it.
I don't really remember the scene that well. I've seen this movie twice, and it never really clicked that he was on the run because he killed a cop, because I feel like the shots were so jumpy that it was hard to like get that like that happened.
Yeah, I can screen share it right now. It's like literally 20 seconds. Like, it happens so quickly, which is just like another thing, but everyone can see this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. Oh my God. And there you go. And then that's it. And then you get this wide shot and this tracking shot of Michelle running away, right? But in this scene, you have what, 3 or 4 shots within 10 seconds that's supposed to represent this very climactic point in the movie. And I was wondering if anyone kind of had any thoughts as to maybe why the filmmakers chose to go through such a, consequential moment so quickly and so choppily. Like, what was
Sure, yeah. I think that the reason that it was done like that was because it was meant to be a side fact. It wasn't meant to, also because of the girl that he's with and the girls that he's with and just this kind of other life that he's living. Obviously we don't, if we're saying the perspective like of the girl, like we don't really find out till like almost the end of the film that he's wanted for murder. And so I think because this was like a 20-second, it was very like, it was kind of like, whoa, what just happened? That was too quick. And that's for a reason. I think that was on purpose. I think that it would have had a very different effect if that scene was drawn out and if there were flashbacks through the film and blah blah blah. But I think it's very intentional that this was quick and put at the start. It's kind of like a memory that Michelle doesn't want to look back on. It's just kind of something that happened that we need to know, but he's not really thinking about it, to our extent.
I think it kind of is meant to show like that it wasn't premeditated and it was all very in the moment and rushed, and he didn't mean to do it. And that's kind of his idea of it for the rest of the film, is it was panicked, and I think the shots, the quick successive cuts, kind of convey that.
Yeah, definitely these like jump cuts that are used throughout the whole film. Like this is it's very fast paced what's happening. You know, he's on the run, he owes people money, he's killed somebody, he's trying to get him and his girlfriend to Rome. And it's a very fast paced kind of it kind of it creates anxiety within the viewer as like you're watching a scene and then a cut and then a cut and then a cut. But within this particular scene, they cut before you can really see what I guess you're supposed to or what you feel you're supposed to. So like it's very close up on him, right? The camera's very zoomed in. And then as you're kind of panning across Michelle, it cuts before you even see the full gun. And then it cuts before the gun goes off. And then it cuts before the guy even falls to the ground. So it's just this very fast paced kind of like what Brady just said, impulsive. And I was wondering like maybe like what you guys thought about this whole like it feels like it's being cut off and like what maybe is the significance of that.
Honestly, just the fact that the shots are so cut up and that we get some information, but the information we get is so quick, it kind of is like in reflection of movies like that film genre of like where you have to put all the pieces together to get that answer of what's happening. But the film will tell you in the end, but you try to figure out as you watch, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to add on to a point like that I made like earlier with like how the jump cuts, obviously this film is like a pioneer for editing and like the jump cuts are just its own entity and creates anxiety and it creates a fast-paced environment. Oh my god, I just forgot what I was gonna say. But it tying it back to meshes and kind of tying everything that we've said together, it does create this sense of surrealism and kind of suspends the viewer's belief, right? It kind of like suspends you in this like surrealist moment. And I think that like, you know, we can talk about cinematography, we can talk about mise-en-scène, but I think editing in these two films is really what stands out. And unless anyone else has something of noteworthy to share, all right, awesome. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye.